Alrighty, good evening, everybody, in person and my online friends. Welcome into the second session of our 2025 Civic Awareness Series. I'm so excited to see so many more friends coming out and a lot of new faces, which is very exciting for our February session on the state of immigration. And I can't see you all out there in internet land, but I hope you're having a nice time at home. I think also this is the first time I haven't actually forgotten something before the start of our program. I'm also riding on that high right now. But I just wanted to welcome everybody in. I'm Chris. I'm your adult programs coordinator here at the library. And I'm so excited to be continuing our partnership with the League of Women Voters of the Palatine area. The Civic Awareness Series happens on the fourth Tuesday of the month, always hybrid from 7 to 8 p.m. So you can watch it from wherever you're comfortable and get engaged, get educated, and learn a little bit, which I guess is the same thing as getting educated, but whatever. Just a few friendly reminders for our in-person audience and our online audience. First, for our online audience, your cameras and microphones are turned off. If you are having any technical difficulties during the program, please reach out to us through the Q&A and we'll do our best to go back and forth with you and solve those issues. We are also live streaming this program to YouTube. So if you're having a lot of troubles with Zoom, you can go to our YouTube page, SchaumburgLibrary.org, youtube.org. It should be /Schaumburg Library, or you can just go to YouTube, type in Schaumburg Library, and find the live stream there. Sometimes that's the easiest duct tape to a technology fix for us. That's also, though, the Q&A, where you're going to put any questions you have for either of our very knowledgeable and amazing speakers this evening. You're welcome to put those in as you go, but we're going to tackle all those questions at the end of the program. And if you need, closed captions have been enabled for your convenience. You can turn those on or off using your Zoom toolbar. For our in-person guests, if you have questions for our wonderful speakers, if you have not already gotten a little note card and something to write on, they're over there. We'll make sure you get one. You can just put your hand in the air. Once you have questions written down, throw those cards high in the air. And a league member or myself will grab the card. Oh, there we go. My friend over there in the corner will make sure to grab cards for you. And I might also as well and run them over for our moderator who will ask questions at the end. Just helps us keep a little bit more organized, make sure we're not asking repeat questions, and make sure we're hitting questions that multiple people really would like the answer to. We will also, like I said, be fielding your online questions. So again, make sure you throw those in the Q&A. For our in-person audience, restrooms are located out that exit door. Directly on your left is the ladies. If you go a little bit further down is the gentlemen's. And in between the two is the water fountain. If you're at home, I hope you know where your restroom and water is located. Without further ado, I've taken up far much more of our time for this extremely heavy topic than I should. I'm going to turn things over to Terry I almost called you Janet. Terry Gazowski from the League of Women Voters to introduce our speakers. Terry.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, my name is Terry Gazowski. I'm the co-events director with Janet Sonoyka for League of Women Voters Palatine, Barrington, and Schaumburg area. Janet will be leading the session as Chris was describing. First, I want to thank you all for your interest in the Civic Awareness Series and civic awareness in general. Thank you also to Schaumburg Library and Chris for partnering with the League on this series. For newcomers in the series, a bit about the League. It's a nonpartisan political organization. Anyone can join or support the League in our mission of promoting civic engagement, voter education, and advocacy on various current top issues. We are over 100 years old, but welcome the energy of all ages and all genders. You can learn more about the League and participation through the website that we put in the chat, as well as where to vote on April 1st. For today's topic of interest, we welcome Sara Dady and Madeline Zavodi in deciphering the state of our immigration in the next hour. Sara comes to us from practicing family-based immigration, including visas for victims of domestic violence and other crimes, asylum, as well as deportation defense for over 19 years. She is the principal attorney of Dady Law Group in Rockford, Illinois. Sara is a member of American Immigration Lawyers Association and the National Immigration Project. She writes and presents frequently on immigration matters and is an advocate for comprehensive immigration reform. It's a lot. Sara graduated with a BA in Classical Studies and Political Science from Luther College and earned her JD from William Mitchell's College of Law. She volunteers her time with the 4-H and the League of Women Voters of Greater Rockford. Thank you for that. And in 2018, Sara made a run for the U.S. Congress in the 16th Congressional District. So, and our other speaker, Madeline Zavodny, is in the Donna L. Gibbs and First Coast Systems Professor of Economics at the University of North Florida. We have a lot of credentials, so sorry for my reading here. She is also a research fellow of the Institute for the Study of Labor, and her research focuses on economic issues related to immigration, including over 40 articles published in academic journals like U.S. Immigration Reform in a New Era of Globalization and the Economics of Immigration as well. She received a BA in economics from Claremont McKenna College and a PhD in economics from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. We'll have a few minutes for QA. For those in person, please write them on the cards. And those in the remote, put in the Zoom QA as Chris described. And Chris and Janet will present them. We welcome you for all coming and your generous time to attend here, as well as our speakers to help us decipher this very important topic of the day. Sara, how would you like to get us kicked off? Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Welcome, everyone. I am Sara Dady. I am an immigration lawyer from Rockford, Illinois, and I am absolutely delighted to be here. And I am really delighted by your library and the fact that so many people are using it. This is the League of Women Voters position on immigration. Those of you familiar with the League know that we go through a rigorous time to study issues of good governance and then take positions. Immigration policy should promote the reunification of immediate families, meet economic, business, and employment needs, and be responsive to those facing political persecution or humanitarian crisis. Doesn't sound like anything terribly objectionable, sounds very reasonable, which is a very League of Women Voters. Anything that I say tonight that is an opinion does not necessarily represent the League of Women Voters. It is my opinion based on my long time being an immigration lawyer in the United States. All right, so why is immigration so controversial? What most reasonable minds can agree on is that the U.S. has an absolute right to control who crosses its borders. There should not be any undocumented people in the United States. There should be a lawful process for all non-citizens to seek entry to the U.S. for either temporary stays or permanent residency. Annual visa numbers, and by visa numbers, I mean green cards, should be based on actual U.S. economic need, family needs, and humanitarian responsibilities. Individuals who pose a danger to the U.S. should not be granted entry, and individuals who have harmed the U.S. should be deported. Individuals should not be denied entry solely because of their race, religion, color, national origin, sex, or other immutable characteristics. How many people agree? Now, what if I told you our immigration system does none of those things? But we assume that it does. And so when we're engaged in national discourse, we have a large group of people that assumes this is exactly what our laws do. So there is a disconnect. All right. We have too many people coming to the United States, right? Well, maybe not. Immigrants make up less than 15% of our population, which is slightly less than they did over a century ago. Although the professor might correct me on this, she has more recent numbers. But still about less than 15% of total US population as a percentage of our population. Undocumented immigrants make up about 23% of the total US foreign-born population, which means, of course, if you meet someone that was born in another country here in the United States, chances are that person is not an undocumented immigrant. Chances are that person is here legally. In fact, might even be a naturalized citizen. As a percentage of total US population, undocumented immigrants make up less than 4%. But for some reason, we spend 99% of our time talking about immigration, only talking about less than 4% of our population. All right, so what's the right way to come to the United States? This is my favorite quote from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Immigration laws bear a striking resemblance to King Minos's labyrinth in ancient Crete. The tax laws and the Immigration and Nationality Acts are examples we have cited of Congress's ingenuity in passing statutes certain to accelerate the aging process of judges. So if our very own federal judges can't understand our immigration system, what hope do people who do not speak English and may not even have a high school diploma have of understanding our immigration system? All right, so here's a very brief overview of US immigration law. We passed our first law in 1790, which limited naturalization, becoming a citizen, if you were not born here, to free white citizens. So our first act was to exclude people from citizenship. The second thing we did as a nation was we granted the president broad authority to deport aliens who were considered a threat to the peace and safety of the United States. Most of those laws expired in 1801, except for one, the Alien Enemies Act, which is still in effect. And this law served as a basis for things like the Japanese internment camps, for making Jewish and German citizens in the United States register during World War II. And this is the same act that the current president is talking about using in order to do mass deportations, to frame people crossing our southern border as a foreign invasion to justify use of the Alien Enemies Act. We didn't do anything else on immigration until the late 1880s, after the railroads were built. We had Chinese immigrants come over and build the railroads. When that was done, Congress decided that Chinese immigrants were depressing wages on the West Coast, and there were concerns about racial purity in the United States. Congress felt that Americans should look a certain way, and Chinese did not fit. So we passed the Chinese Exclusion Act to bar Chinese immigrants. Then in the late 19 teens, there was a rise of isolationism, and that resulted in a fear that there were too many of the wrong kinds of immigrants coming from the wrong countries, particularly Southern and Eastern Europe. We passed the Emergency Quota Act because there were too many of the wrong kinds of immigrants coming. And the express purpose was to preserve Northern European immigrants as the majority of immigrants to the United States. We did that again in 1924. And this was a time of rising isolationism and immigration restrictionism in our country. Then we had the Great Depression, immigration dropped off drastically. World War II, all of our men went off to fight, and we decided that we needed workers. And at that point, Congress repealed the Chinese Exclusion Act, when we needed workers in this country. We let Mexicans cross our borders freely to come and work. After World War II, there were fears about the Cold War and the Soviet Union, aka Russia. So we heightened screening procedures. We created visa preference categories for skilled workers and relatives of US citizens. Then 1965, this was our major immigration reform. This created our immigration system and is still the law today. It eliminated quotas by eliminating the word quota from the law, but it still set a limit on annual visa numbers. 1980, we passed our modern Refugee Act, which is still our modern Refugee Act to this day, which is our asylum system. 1986, we had a huge undocumented population in our country, primarily in agriculture. So President Reagan signed the Amnesty Act. Reagan said of Mexicans, they're not aliens, they're our neighbors. And so undocumented immigrants that cross our border without permission were allowed to apply for lawful status. It created an agriculture worker visa program that doesn't work too well. And how do we know it didn't work too well? Because in the 1990s, when our economy boomed, we had another giant entrance of undocumented workers into our country because our visa system didn't work. So President Clinton took the opposite approach as President Reagan and passed the harshest immigration laws that we've ever seen in our country, and we still have today. It created mandatory immigration detention. It limited federal court review of immigration decisions, and it limited relief from deportation. So it became much easier to deport people. It created new violations, which would disqualify people from getting legal status, and created new violations that would make it easier to deport people who have legal status. All right, so I like to think about immigration like it's a highway. Our immigration system is a highway. 1965, it looks great. Plenty of lanes, not a lot of traffic, smooth sailing. But then as time goes by, traffic increases, right? And then pretty soon, this is what our highway looks like. This is what happens when you don't maintain a highway, when you don't repave a road. You get potholes. And Congress's response to our aging, unpaved, heavily trafficked immigration system is to close more lanes. You know, if there's a pothole in one lane, let's just close that lane. Their other solution is just to hire more police to police the highway. Police don't fill in potholes. Police don't widen lanes. But that seems to be Congress's two solutions to our immigration highway system. All right, let's talk about Customs and Border Protection. This is the largest federal law enforcement agency in our country. They have over 60,000 employees, well, currently. They are able to process over 1 million people per day at our ports of entry to the United States. Ports of entry are airports, train stations, bus stations, land entries, anywhere where someone's coming in from another country. So CBP can do a lot. So when we hear on the news, oh, 30,000 people showed up at our border, 200,000 people showed up at our border. The problem is when you have a bunch of people showing up at only 4 or 5 ports of entry unexpectedly, it becomes a problem because they're not spread out over the US. But CBPs can do a lot. They do a great job. Okay, who enters at ports of entries? Well, anyone with documents that allows them to enter the United States. So US citizens with our passports, lawful permanent residents, which are green card holders, they're lawful permanent residents. Individuals with short-term visas, tourist visas, student visas, short-term work visas, highly skilled, low skilled. Refugees approved for resettlement in the US. The word refugee is a term of art. Refugee means someone who has had their asylum application approved while they were outside of the United States. They had their interview, they were background checked, and they've been approved for resettlement in another country. Individuals with parole documents. Parole has nothing to do with criminal justice system. Parole is just simply permission to come into the United States. It's not real legal status, and it has an expiration date. We have various forms of parole, humanitarian parole, people coming in because they have a relative sick in the hospital and they want to see them. Deferred action for childhood arrivals can request permission to travel. People with TPS, temporary protected status, can request permission to travel and be allowed to come back in. Okay, so last year, the Department of Homeland Security granted an estimated 132 million non-immigrant admissions to the United States. That's a lot. Non-immigrant admissions are people who are not US citizens and who do not have green cards. It's everybody else. They were inspected and allowed to come into the United States. In 2023, about 1.1 million people became lawful permanent residents. 52% of them were already living in the United States with some sort of status. So those aren't brand new people. Those were people that were able to get a green card from some other status. And in 2023, we resettled over 60,000 refugees in the United States. Currently, the president has announced that we will resettle 0 refugees in the United States for the year 2025. Biden had set the number at 100,000, but now it's 0. Although a federal judge in Seattle today just issued a decision saying the president can't just refuse to resettle refugees in the United States. There are limits to what the president can do. We shall see. And then 54,000 asylees. And these are people who applied for asylum inside of the United States. So they came into the United States, somehow they're present in the United States, and they made an application for asylum. These could be people that came in with tourist visas or student visas or parole documents, or people that entered without permission. All right, it's hard to understand, but the majority of people in this world do not have an application they can even make to try and come to the United States. It doesn't exist. There's still not a line for 11 plus million undocumented immigrants to get in. There is no line for them. If there was a line, it would be in the line. Immigrant visas equal green cards. It's called an immigrant visa if you apply for it outside of the United States and have your interview with the US Embassy. It's called a green card once you're in the United States, or if you apply for it inside of the United States. So it's a multi-step process. While we do offer unlimited immigrant visa numbers for immediate relatives of US citizens, if you are not the immediate relative of a US citizen, and note, children have to be 21, so there's no such thing as an anchor baby. There's not been such thing as an anchor baby in our law since 1978. First, you have to have someone who can petition for you. And then a visa number must be available if you are not the immediate relative of a US citizen. Because remember, we still limit visa numbers. And then you have to prove that you do not have disqualifying immigration violations. So here are the lines. Here are the lines for family-based immigration. We limit family visas to 226,000 per year. And then we further limit the availability of those visas to people who are immigrating from China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines. And since there's so many more petitions than there are visa numbers available, it's created a backlog. So you can see, if I want to petition for my sister and I'm a US citizen, I can file, she can get in the F4 lane as a sibling of a US citizen, but it's going to be about 25, 26 years from the time I file my petition until she can have her interview. If I am a permanent resident, I have a green card, and I want to file a petition, I want to immigrate my husband and my 18-year-old daughter to the United States, they can get in lane F2A. And right now, there are visa numbers available for petitions filed in 2021, but I'm filing my petition in 2025. So, okay, it's going to be like 4 years before their interview. But then my daughter is going to turn over 21, which means she's going to fall out of that lane and into the F2B lane. And there are visa numbers available for petitions filed in 2005. So it's going to be 20 years. My husband might be able to come in 4 years, but my daughter's going to have to wait another 20 years before she can have her interview because she has aged out. This has been the primary problem, and this has been a contributing factor to undocumented immigration to the United States because families don't want to be separated for decades. All right. Well, if you don't fall into one of those family lanes, and by the way, the lanes are F1 is for sons and daughters, adult sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. F2A, spouses and unmarried children under the age of 21 of permanent residence. F2B is for adult unmarried sons and daughters of permanent residents. F3 is for married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. F4, siblings of U.S. citizens. So if you do not have one of those relationships, there's no lane for you to get in. Notice there's no lane for married sons and daughters of permanent residents. So while my daughter's waiting in Mexico for 20 years for interview, if she gets married, my petition for her is automatically terminated. Okay, we limit employment-based green cards to 140,000 a year. Keep in mind, these are arbitrary limits set by Congress over 30 years ago. They are no way tied to economic demand or labor market demands or family reunification demands. So they have lanes as well. I will point out the fifth category down here, which the C means current. That means a visa number is immediately available. These are where you can buy your green card. If you invest $500,000 to $1 million or more dollars in a business in the United States that employs a certain number of U.S. citizens, yes, you can buy your green card. If not, your employer's going to have to sponsor you, jump through some hoops. There are some waiting times because they're limited. And if you were unlawfully present in the U.S. or overstayed a visa or out of status on your work visa, you're not going to get one. All right. So let's say you had a petition, there's a visa number available, you've been waiting 20 years for it, you're 100% guaranteed to get it because you did everything right. No, because now we have a big long list of immigration violations that will disqualify you. Number one, entering without inspection to the United States, entering illegally. There are a couple of exceptions. Unlawful presence in the U.S. So if you came in without permission, you're here unlawfully, and you don't fall into any of the exceptions, you have to leave to go to that visa interview. The moment you depart the U.S., you trigger a 10-year bar. So you got to stay out for another 10 years before you can get your visa and return to the U.S. That was part of that 1997 law. Anyone's convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude, which are theft-related offenses generally, and also offenses like use of a fake ID. Can we think of who might use a fake ID if they're living unlawfully in the U.S.? All right. Presidents can work around the law, but presidents can't change the law. The law is what it is. But what presidents can do is they can eliminate temporary protected status, which this president just did for Venezuelans. Asylum. People that come into the United States without permission, or they use a fake visa to come in or a passport, they are eligible to apply for asylum, no matter how they entered the United States. If they have a well-founded fear of persecution because of something they can't change about themselves, they can apply for asylum. That's what the law is. So when you say, well, people came in illegally, well, what if they have a legal process? So are these people breaking the law if they have a legal process that the law allows them to do? These are complicated questions. They can't be reduced to a soundbite, although, however, they have been. Okay, you can see what's happening. You know, the U.S., we don't live in isolation. We live in a world full of people and other countries, and stuff goes on in other countries. In 2021, we got about just over 9,000 applications for asylum from Venezuelans. In 2023, we got 98,000. Bad stuff is going on in Venezuela. Cuba, 2021, 2,800 applications for asylum. 2023, 78,000. Haiti, we got 5,000 in 2021. Now it's 30,000 from Haiti. All right, but these people don't qualify for asylum. Well, we don't know that until they have the opportunity to present their application and their evidence to an asylum officer or immigration judge. And yes, we do in fact grant people asylum. All right, so let's say you get asylum or your green card. Welcome to the United States of America. Don't unpack, because now you're subject to grounds of deportation. Anyone who gets any of these kinds of immigration violations is subject to deportation, even if they did everything right. A permanent resident who's convicted of 2 shoplifting offenses, no matter how long ago they occurred, is deportable. There's no statute of limitations on immigration offenses. Immigration proceedings, deportation, is a civil administrative process, okay? We have 2 kinds of laws in this country: civil laws and criminal laws. Immigration laws are civil. Immigration offenses are civil laws, not crimes. And we know that because there are limited due process rights for civil offenses. You don't have the right to a free attorney. You don't have to be advised anything you say can and will be used against you in immigration court. Limited due process protections for civil offenses. Yet there's mandatory civil detention. We, the people, have our lawyer in the courtroom through the ICE attorney, but immigrants, there's no public defender's office for immigration court because it's not a crime. It's a civil offense. All right, and right now we can deport as many people as we want, but there's about a 4 million case backlog in our immigration courts. So if you want to pile on another 6 million, 7 million, 8 million, nothing happens fast in immigration court. But we do spend a lot of money on it. And this is about how much we'd spend for mass deportation. And that the biggest part of that cost is to build new immigration detention facilities, $167 billion a year. So it's going to cost about $88 billion a year to deport 1 million immigrants per year. All right, last thing, sanctuary city. We hear this a lot, especially in Illinois. So Illinois has decided to follow the Supreme Court's anti-commandeering doctrine, which says the federal government cannot force states and cities to use their own resources to enforce federal civil law, like immigration. So
this on your end, it got weird.
Okay. So that's why in Illinois, state police, county sheriffs, city police are not allowed to ask anybody about their immigration status because it's a civil offense and their concern is criminal investigation, not that. And we want people to call the police when they are the victim of a crime. So there has to be trust. And if a victim of domestic violence thinks that she's going to get deported, if she calls the police for help, she's not going to call the police for help. The victim of a robbery is afraid he's going to be deported. If he calls the police for help, he's not going to call the police for help, which is why Illinois has drawn this clear line between federal civil law enforcement and our state criminal law enforcement. And if you want to learn more about the Trust Act, you can go to the Illinois Attorney General's website and it lays it all out. And if you see law enforcement in our state violating the Trust Act, you can make a complaint to the Illinois Attorney General's office. All right. Thank you, Madeline. I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. That was just an absolute wealth of information, to put it mildly. I always learn so much every time I hear an immigration lawyer talk about the system, because it's so complicated and so hard to understand. So, and I think that gave an excellent flavor of how true that is. So I'm going to just show you 7 quick slides that will, I think, first give some kind of bigger, broader picture of immigrants in the United States and what's happened over the last few years that helps explain perhaps why President Trump won re-election and why we're talking about this topic today. And then a few slides about how some, perhaps the majority of economists view immigration and from an economic standpoint, why it can be very beneficial. And what I hope that you will leave this presentation with is sort of an understanding of why ultimately we need immigrants, preferably legally, but they're a good thing. Before I delve further into these 7 slides, though, I need to say that any opinions that I give do not represent those of the University of North Florida, the State University System of Florida, or any organization that has funded my research over the years. I will also say it was very interesting to hear about Illinois. I grew up in Bloomingdale. I'm a very proud graduate of Glenbard North High School. And the situation down here in Florida is considerably different these days than it is in Illinois with regard to immigration. So Sarah showed a picture a lot like this one. At the very beginning, that what this shows you in the blue bars is the number of immigrants living in the United States. So the Census Bureau's most recent estimate from 2023 was about 50 million people. Well, that sounds like a lot, 50 million, but we are a huge country, right? We're a country of well over 330 million. So the red line here is showing you the share of the population that is foreign born, regardless of legal status, regardless of whether they've become naturalized citizens. And this is a little over 14% of the population in 2023, maybe up to 15% now. So that's considerably, higher, perhaps, and in a historical perspective, that is a relatively large share. So the last time we had such a large percentage of the population foreign born was way back at the turn of the 1800s to the 1900s during the era of mass migration. This was when my family came over from Eastern Europe before the borders really got closed in 1920. So this is kind of the big picture over the last 170 years or so. To narrow in on what's been happening more recently is to think perhaps about how people are coming in. So this is showing estimates from the congressional budget of dividing net inflows, so the total number of people coming in minus the number going out, because some immigrants do leave, in 3 categories. So the blue bars are legal permanent residents. And as Sarah explained, those are immigrants. They're coming with a permanent visa. Then there's non-immigrants in gray. These are not the tourists who are coming here to go to Disney World. This is the ones who are coming to work primarily or as foreign students. Small numbers on net every year. A lot of them, leave as well as come in. What's really interesting here is the red part called other foreign nationals, which is the euphemism that the Congressional Budget Office chose to use for undocumented, unauthorized, illegal, whatever you want to call them, and these quasi-legal immigrants who are coming in. They've filed asylum applications, they have parole, they have temporary protected status, whatever. And so in the last few years, you can see there's been this huge increase in this number of other foreign nationals. And as Sarah made clear, people are coming in these categories in this odd illegal or quasi-legal grouping because there's no legal channel for them to enter. And things at home have been very bad in Central America and South America and further abroad as a result of climate change, economic kind of hangover from COVID, and also that under the Trump administration, we largely shut down the borders, removed people's ability to file for amnesty and so on. And so there's sort of pent up demand to come. And so we got what the Congressional Budget Office called the surge, which was sort of an extra 4 to 5 million people coming. And that really ended under President Biden in the summer of 2024, in part because Mexico and other countries to the south made it very hard to come. And also the Biden administration made it very hard to ask for asylum starting in summer of 2024. So this flow in red is largely over, but that predates the current administration. All right, switching gears, 5 pictures related to economics. This first one is thinking about the education distribution of people who are in the labor force. So this is sort of prime age workers who are either US born in blue or foreign born in gray. And so one thing that really sticks out is that immigrants are different from US natives, like a lot of us, in that they are much more likely to not have finished high school, to be over here on the left, right? Almost 20% of foreign born have not completed high school, versus these days, well less than 5% of US born workers. Right? The US labor force has become much more highly educated. Now, lots of immigrants are highly educated as well. And if we broke this out, this bachelor's degree and higher group into PhDs, a lot more would be foreign born than US born, actually. But nonetheless, there's a kind of this difference in the education distribution. Now, you might be a little bit concerned about this, but there are some reasons you shouldn't be. And it's because the share who are not high school graduate in the US has gotten so very small. And even these middle categories, high school graduates and some college, while the shares might look kind of big, the absolute number has been falling in the United States. Again, US natives have become much more highly educated. So what this shows is the change over roughly the last 13 years and the number of people in the labor force by education group. So it's not a percent distribution, it's the change in the number in millions. And so every group of US natives, except those who have at least a bachelor's degree, has shrunk. And so it's sort of like the lower end and the middle of the education distribution that's US born is shrinking. So immigrants are coming in and they're helping to reduce that shrinkage or offset it in the middle categories. Now, not every job requires a college degree. We need people who are going to do all kinds of jobs in the United States, right? And we don't want people necessarily who are overqualified for the jobs that they have. And so this is not a bad thing to have growth in these education groups. And again, it's helping offset the changes that have been happening among the US population. Okay, I hope you all are still with me. A couple more figures related to the economics. This one is showing back to the Congressional Budget Office their estimates of how this immigration surge that was happening under President Biden, and that they thought when they did these estimates would continue through 2026. So they thought we were going to get an extra roughly 8.7 million more people, again, coming in this illegal or quasi-legal status. And what that would do to gross domestic product, so national income, GDP, and it was good, right? That starting back in 2021, when the surge first started, it's kind of a small, less than 100 billion a year. It keeps on growing so that by 2024, we were at almost 350 billion being added to GDP. And had that continued and had people been able to stay, we would by 2034 have GDP over $1 trillion bigger. And most of that is simply happening because of having more workers. More workers, more output, more income. Right? And this benefits ultimately everyone. Now, there are winners and losers from immigration, but I think it's really important to recognize that immigration makes the pie bigger. Another thing that it does is it reduces the deficit. It's very interesting to think about on a day in which the House of Representatives is thinking about what's going to do to the budget and tax codes, that one way to reduce, not eliminate, but to reduce the deficit and not increase the debt as much would be to have more immigrants. So had that surge continued, and if they stayed, this Congressional Budget Office was projecting that over this 11-year period, we would get an extra $1.2 trillion in federal revenue, but it would only cost 300 billion in additional expenses borne by you and me taxpayers at the federal level. Now, at the state and local level, it's a little bit trickier because states and localities bear a lot of costs, but nonetheless at the federal level, where our deficit is very concerning, immigration helps us chip away a little bit at that. Last figure is looking at what does the future hold? And this is why we really need immigrants. We are an aging country. And by 2033, where this red arrow is, the Congressional Budget Office is projecting that deaths in the US will outnumber births. We're getting very close to what would be no population growth absent immigration. So that's what the blue is the births minus deaths, the natural increase. The gray is the net immigration that they were projecting. They're just kind of holding it constant in the future. But absent having immigration, in 8 years, our country will be getting smaller. If you own a home, if you own stocks, if you want somebody to help take care of you in your old age, if you want someone for your children to marry, maybe, this is something that would be very, very concerning. Okay, so with that, I think that we've had maybe enough economics for the day. Hopefully Chris is there to run the show.
Yes, yes, we are. So sorry. Wonderful.
Or Terry or
thank you.
Janet.
Yes, yes.
Great.
Thank you to both of you for the deluge of information. I even just like listening to it and hearing about it was exhausting. I can't imagine actually trying to go through the process itself. So yes, wonderful. We got Q&A questions both in-house and online. Just a reminder, if you have any of those questions, pop those in. We will start with a few questions here. We heard a lot about the root causes and that immigration is something that is happening regardless. So I do pose a question to our speakers about paths forward. So the DREAM Act is already widely supported path to citizenship by the general public. However, legislators have been unable to codify it into law. What is the likelihood that there are any alternative paths to citizenships that could be brought into law that are still popular with the general public, that actually hit the list that was brought to us at the beginning of what a border crossing looks like for immigrants? If you want to get started.
Madeline, do you want that one or shall I take it? Okay, deferred action for childhood arrivals. Remember, there are very few lanes for people to get in. One of the things the president can do is exercise executive authority. And so Obama did that in 2012 and said, okay, we got a whole bunch of undocumented young people in this country. They came in under the age of 16, if they're in school or going to college or working, and they don't have certain criminal convictions and meet some other requirements. We are not going to deport them. We're going to let them get work permits while we are not deporting them. Not deporting someone, knowing that they are deportable, but not deporting them is called deferred action. DACA, deferred action for childhood arrivals. These are people that have no lane to get in. That's it. If they were able to apply for lawful status, they would. In Illinois, here we are over 10 years later, 12 years later, we still have about 30,000 DACA holders in Illinois. And these DACA holders are doctors, they're nurses, they're CNAs, they're truck drivers, they own businesses, they're parents, and they have no way to apply for lawful status. Some of them have children turning 21, but because they came in without permission, they would have to go out for 10 years before they could get an immigrant visa through their child. So the idea is the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act would allow people that qualify for DACA to apply for real legal status. Senator Durbin and Senator Graham, interestingly, bipartisan bill, they've introduced to the Senate every year for the last 25 years. Every legislative session, they've introduced it. Sometimes the House has passed it and the Senate has not. Sometimes the Senate has passed it and the House has not. In January, before the inauguration, Donald Trump said something about how he thought DACA should be allowed to stay. All he has to do is pick up the phone and call Speaker Johnson and say, pass the DREAM Act. That's all he has to do. But he is not. Does that answer your question? Oh, also DACA is going to end. It's in litigation. A federal judge said that President Obama exceeded his executive authority. So it's in appeals, and if Trump doesn't terminate it, which he tried to do last time he was president, the court's going to terminate it. So there's a ticking clock on DACA.
Thank you. So next question, do individuals with green cards have means to fear during the current climate, especially if they do not commit any crimes? So we have all these different categories. How does the current change affect that?
Okay, well, normal laws don't apply. And I started practicing law under George W. Bush. Okay, so I've been here a while. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which are like immigration police for civil law, they have no jurisdiction over U.S. citizens. And they certainly can't deport people unless they have evidence that that person has violated our immigration laws, right? Green card holders, as we know, can be deportable if they have certain immigration violations. So if a green card holder does not have any immigration violations, they are not deportable, and they should not be arrested by ICE and put in deportation proceedings. But what I have been seeing over the last several weeks is that ICE has a directive to arrest as many people as possible. They don't care what happens after the arrest. They want to get the civil immigration arrest numbers up. They're still about where they were under Biden. They said that they were going to arrest violent and dangerous criminals, but quite simply, there aren't enough immigrants who are violent and dangerous criminals in this country. So now they're going after people that have no criminal record, but do have immigration violations. The other thing that ICE has been doing is when people are showing ICE documents, ICE is using that as a justification to detain them in order to verify the documents. Eventually, they'll be let go. But here in Illinois, we don't allow immigration detention in our state. So if ICE makes an arrest of someone in Illinois, they have to be transported to Kentucky or Texas, or maybe even Guantanamo Bay. And then if ICE realizes they, in fact, picked up a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident or someone else who's not deportable, that person's going to have to call someone to go and pick them up. So my advice that I give my clients is don't show anything. ICE is not magic. ICE doesn't know someone's legal status just by looking at them. ICE depends on people to talk to them, to answer their questions, and to show documents to get evidence. So everyone has the right to remain silent. No one has to answer ICE's questions, and nobody has to show ICE documents. And if ICE walks in this room and says, okay, if you're a U.S. citizen, raise your hand. Are you a citizen? Raise your hand. Oh, now you just let me focus on the guy that didn't raise his hand. Good job. U.S. citizens don't need to show anything or say anything. But yes, so I would say this current climate with the directive to make as many arrests as possible, the safest course of action is to not show ICE anything. If ICE doesn't know who you are, they're not magic.
Thank you for another. We're gonna have another economic question. So Madeline, if you want to take this next one, I can find it. Oh, so there is high visibility of the role undocumented workers play in the economy as a labor force. What other ways do populations of undocumented immigrants impact the U.S. economy? I know you touched on this briefly in one of your slides. We saw that like that GDP increase. So what other ways aside from being in the labor force is it beneficial to have or immigrants in general as part of our population?
So I'm a labor economist, so it's like I have a hammer, there's a nail, right? So I do think that working is really important. But immigrants are consumers, right? So they buy things that are made not only by themselves, but by the rest of us. They're entrepreneurs. In fact, immigrants are more likely to found a business than US natives, from just your local mom and pop, auto mechanic or selling, food, to, you know, restaurants to unicorn companies like Google and so on. So they add to the economy in many ways, right? And again, as I mentioned, they intermarry, they have kids, they contribute all over the place in so many ways, both unauthorized and authorized.
Oh, for those at home, we had an audience interjection saying, and they pay taxes.
Yes, they do.
Yes.
Yes. And unauthorized immigrants get virtually nothing from the government other than their children get a public education, which I think is incredibly important, right? If people are here, we want them to get, particularly a K through 12 education, and emergency health care.
That's a great point. And then as throughout our discussion, we've been talking about how there really are no roots right now through the government, and that that DACA is going to be ending soon. So there is a question from the audience. What nonprofits or places do you recommend that we can contribute to financially or otherwise to help immigrants and refugees, and maybe create some of these pathways more locally? If you could both provide, like in your research, maybe you've come across some of these non-government avenues or maybe more local municipal avenues. If you could both comment on that.
Madeline's still with us?
Yes.
Okay, good. Here in Illinois, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, ICIRR.org. All of the excellent state legislation we have around immigration and treating people like people is thanks to that organization. They do amazing advocacy work. They currently are operating a hotline for families affected by ICE action to call and receive resources. So they're a phenomenal organization. The National Immigrant Justice Center, also in Chicago, provides free legal representation in immigration matters, including deportation defense. They need to build their capacity, so they would be another excellent organization.
Well, I would say beyond giving money, give your time in terms of calling your congressperson, calling your senator, calling other people's congress people, and volunteering, and then of course voting.
Yes, the league always seconds voting, please. So on a more technical question, so we had those list of all of the different lanes of how you can come into the country. The question is, when were the family lanes made and by who? Why are we giving family members this special treatment as opposed to the large group of everybody who's coming in, not just family members?
Because our immigration system was created in 1965. And the feeling is that family is important and families should be able to be together, and people don't want to be separated, So that's why. And there were plenty of visa numbers that worked for a while, but then when Congress didn't increase visa numbers to meet the demand, it stopped working. And there's nothing wrong with wanting families together. And I see situations like this. There'll be a naturalized citizen who has a sister back home in their home country, and the sister's developed dementia. And she wants to bring her sister to live with her in the United States and care for her. But there's a 7-year wait for a visa number, or there might be a 20-year wait for a visa number. So, I mean, it's up to Congress. Congress makes the immigration laws. Our Constitution gives Congress the power to make our immigration laws. So only Congress can make the changes. We do, presidents have used their executive authority for things like humanitarian parole to allow people to come in. But parole is short term. It's 1 to 2 years at a time, and then you have to renew it. It's not real legal status.
Okay. So a lot of times, Congress has a lot of things that they have to learn and understand to pass laws. They're not all as lucky as we are to have experts come in and sit and talk with them for an hour. Do you think our representatives, senators understand the system as you have both explained it economically and legally? Or are there, could they benefit from a civic awareness series at this point?
So I will say I've testified in front of a joint committee of the House and Senate, as well as in front of, I can't remember if it was the House or the Senate, but I've been testifying in front of Congress a couple of times. It's just political theater. I mean, they have experts come in and talk at them, and they talk back because they know it's going to be on C-SPAN and so on. I will say a lot of the staffers on Capitol Hill understand immigration law in incredible detail. Why they're not writing laws is and passing them is the bigger question.
Yeah, I agree with Madeline. We clearly are electing a majority of people to Congress who have no interest in solving problems or governing. You know, it's become about building political capital and raising money off of marginalizing groups of people, and immigrants are an easy target. I mean, you find it's really hard to argue, well, they're illegal. Criminals, that makes them a criminal. They broke the law. And it's hard to have the conversation. A civil offense is not a crime. You know, then we have to engage in conversation, and that's not expedient, and it's not going to raise money for Congress. But clearly we're at a point in our country where we have to have these conversations, and you're here, you're ready, and so is your library. This is a good example. Sunday, I received an email from someone saying, hey, the city of Rockford is going to have a resolution at city council Monday night. An alderman has a problem with the sign at the entrance to Rockford that says Rockford, all people are welcome. And the alderman's complaint was that was coded language for bringing in illegals. And that's what we were dealing with at city council. And to their credit, the League of Women Voters of Greater Rockford turned out in force, as well as many other organizations. And in fact, a group of people spontaneously have been holding immigration demonstrations in support of our immigrant neighbors periodically. And the previous Saturday, over 100 people turned out and marched down the street in support of immigrants. So there is this building groundswell of let's treat people decently. And we have to get beyond the pejorative terms and the fear mongering about a bunch of people coming into the community and taking stuff, which is not true. So let's just solve the problem. But that is our responsibility as citizens. And yes, call your U.S. representatives, call your senators when they do something right. The city of Rockford ultimately affirmed that the sign will stay as it is. But the fact that we even had to have that conversation, city council, you need to pay attention to the people that you are electing, even at the local level. And if you have leaders just fueling with this inflammatory language, you know, it's not going to get any better for any of us.
Yes, thank you. And we'll close out with one last question because we are at time. Thank you for everybody who's been staying online and in person. And that's a question to both of our speakers. You know, we've come here, we're engaged, we're interested. If folks want to know more, do you have any resources that you would recommend to our audience tonight? Madeline, if you want to go first.
Oh, well, I have a textbook called The Economics of Immigration. I should go grab it and show it to you. But beyond that, I spend way too much time on Twitter, which I'm not sure I would recommend. I really like the Migration Policy Institute, MPI, migrationpolicy.org. I really like the Pew Research Center, that these are fact-based organizations that are nonpartisan, and they just want to inform people about what's going on.
Yeah, those are great. I love the Migration Policy Institute, amazing information. The American Immigration Council also has very handy fact sheets about immigration. So that's a really great resource. ICIRR, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights.org, ICIRR.org. You can sign up for their newsletter, and they have updates on what's going on with immigration. There's a Reddit Substack called The Migrant, which has really great information, but you have to pay for it. But ICIRR is free, and they're doing phenomenal work right here in Illinois.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Another round of applause for our wonderful speakers this evening. Once again, thank you both, Madeline and Sarah, for all of for your time and your talents and your expertise. And to everybody, if you are interested in our Civic series and learning more about more topics, once again, we are the fourth Tuesday of every month. I believe the next one is March 25th. Please come and join us. You can find more about the event either on the League of Women Voters Palatine website or at the Schaumburg Library Adults Program calendar as well. We'd love to see you here, either online or in person. And hope to see you on the next one. Thank you so much. What's that?
The topic.
The topic is.
Have your voice heard at the state level.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So the topic is for our next one, how to have your voice heard at the state level, which if, tonight has inspired you about immigration, how do you want to have your new opinions on immigration heard at the state level? Come find us in March, where we've got some great new speakers then as well. So thank you, everybody, again, and thank you for the library for hosting us. Have a good evening.
Good night.